Hi. This is my November wrap-up, and it's going to be a little different than normal. I'm Colleen. I don't feel good. One of my kids got me sick, and she tested negative for COVID, so it's not COVID, but I have a really sore throat, and my whole body hurts, and I want to get in bed, but I need to film this. So I'm going to film this throughout the day because I can't talk for very long without my throat bothering me. So also, I did pretty poorly on my November TBR because I did Nano and I finished Nano, so I felt good about that. But I didn't leave a ton of time for reading, and I got in a couple book slumps, which didn't help in an already busy month. But let's talk about a couple of those books right now before I need to take a break. I don't even know if orange juice helps after the cold or if you're really supposed to be drinking it before you get sick. Okay, so the first book I read was Ice Planet Barbarians by Ruby Dixon. Book 1. I got an ARC from NetGalley because they're doing the fancy new cover for print copies since it's such a cultural phenomenon and they need to sell it in Barnes & Noble, and having the original copy, the original cover, which is much sexier, doesn't mesh with display tables at Barnes & Noble apparently. I will say this. The new cover doesn't match the book at all. The new cover makes me feel like I'm opening a fantasy romance that's like extremely epic and a little bit more like star-crossed lovers-y because they're like facing different ways. But here's the thing about the book. The book completely met my expectations. And those expectations were that I thought it would be like good. And it was good. So we follow, and this is the first one. So it begins with this group of women being kidnapped by like evil aliens who are gonna sell them. And you don't really understand a lot of what's going on. There's a lot of language barriers, which was cool that it wasn't like everyone spoke English. But the narrator, female narrator, in this one is Georgie. And the bad aliens sort of like crash part of their ship purposefully on this random planet and then leave the women there thinking they're going to come back and get them. It's like a freezing cold planet. And Georgie decides to go try to find food, water, shelter, anything, because they're all basically going to die on this planet. They can breathe, though. There's enough oxygen in the atmosphere that they can breathe, which is extremely convenient. And then the hero is Vectel, who is a Sakui, which is this race of like giant blue aliens. There are some females, but not very many. And they have tails, horns, interesting man parts. And they're like, it's like a fated mate situation after they meet. They don't speak the same language, so they have a hard time communicating, which I liked that part. It is like a super sexy, like erotica, basically. I mean, it's not true erotica because there is like a romance plot line, but it was good. It was like a good, not too long sci-fi romance read. I don't think I'm gonna buy the second one to read it. I could see myself maybe if I was like going on vacation and had a really long plane flight, like put a bunch of these on my Kindle and then read them like that. But since it's 2021 and I have little kids, I do not have a solo very long plane flight on the books. So Ice Planet Barbarians by Ruby Dixon, 4 stars. A bit of sci-fi romance fun. The next book I read this month was Witches Get Stitches by Juliette Cross, which is book 3 in the Stay a Spell series. I loved it. Obviously, I really loved the first 2, so I was super excited to read this, and it didn't disappoint. This one follows Nico, who we meet in the first book. He is the hero, Matteo, in that book's cousin. and Violet, who is one of the Savoy sisters. This book starts actually with like a little bit of like a prequel chapter that they've already met in Austin, Texas. I can't remember if it was how many years ago it was. I think it was like a year ago from the first book, but some time has passed. Nico knows right away that Violet is like his fated mate because Nico's a werewolf like his cousin, and they can smell their mates, which is like my favorite monster trope, is when the monster smells the love of their life and is like, oh, I know you're the one. So Nico moves to New Orleans from Texas to be close to Violet. Violet is a psychic, and she does a tarot spread about them right away, and she basically misinterprets her tarot spread to believe they should stay apart. Nico's in it for the long game, though, and I believe the beginning of this book, not counting the prologue, they've been like friends for close to 2 years, that he's just been waiting for her to sort of come around. A cool part of this book also is that Violet's a tattoo artist, and she and Nico open a tattoo parlor, and she can give magical tattoos that are helpful to different supernatural creatures. So there's like witches, vampires, grims, werewolves. Who else? I'm probably forgetting more that might need like magical help. And she has a tattoo of the Empress tarot card. That's like a magical tattoo. That was a really cool aspect of the book. I really love this. The conflict in this book comes that Nico used to be part of this like werewolf gang, and then he got out of it, and they come to New Orleans, and excuse me, all werewolves are extremely protective of their mates. So that's like, he doesn't want anyone near Violet. I love this series. It is really fun. I really hope there's more coming out, because I've got the last book that's out so far. I'm probably going to start reading in like an hour. And I hope there's more. I hope there's going to be more. Please let there be more. So that's Witches Get Stitches by Juliette Cross. 5 stars. Great read. Wonderful. My neighbor just started mowing their lawn or doing their leaf blower or whatever. It's like, it's a Wednesday. Okay, sorry if it's loud. I apologize. I hope you can't hear it. The next book I read was The Stranger Behind You by Carol Goodman. I adore Carol Goodman, and I am planning on doing a Carol Goodman appreciation video at some point to talk to you about how much I love all her mysteries. So this is her newest one, and she's like an auto buy for me. I think there's like 1 or 2 of her books that I haven't read because they came out like when I had really little babies. But I'll probably read them this year because now I'm caught up with all her new releases. So I don't actually read what they're about, usually. I just purchase them. And this one I just bought, and I really love the cover because it's like super like gothic-y looking and dark. And most of her books are super like dark academia and like upstate New York and winter or fall, summer, fall, but they're usually like ominous weather. So imagine my surprise when we started this one and it was New York City and summer. But don't worry, it turns to autumn very quickly. This was an interesting read for me because if any other author had written it, I probably would not have purchased it because it had some trigger warning stuff in here that I don't usually read. So there are 2 narrators in this book, and they're basically enemies. So it was a really interesting juxtaposition to have their 2 points of views of the story. The first narrator is Joan Lurie, and she's a reporter, and the book begins with her breaking a story that this extremely wealthy, powerful man who owns like a media corporation, so like newspapers, but beyond that, is a serial sexual predator. And the book opens with her celebrating with her team that they were able to break this story. And she has spent over 2 years collecting evidence against him. She gets a little too drunk at the party, and when she is walking home, someone follows her into her apartment and she gets attacked. She gets chloroformed and attacked, and she wakes up and doesn't really know what happened. She then gets this huge advance to write a book because her article is so successful. So she moves into this building that's called, it used to be a Magdalene Laundry, and it's called The Refuge. It's like super secure, super state of the art, lots of cameras. So she will always know who's in the hallway near her apartment. It's very like secure in that way. The second narrator is Melissa Osgood. And Melissa is the wife of the man Joan's article has brought down. Carol Goodman did such a good job writing Melissa Osgood because she's so unlikable. She is so unlikable. She has like no redeeming qualities. She's supposed to be like racist and a jerk. And when you're reading her chapters, you're like so like frustrated. You have such a visceral response to reading this woman's point of view. It's not good. The book is very good though. There's also another part of the story about Joan's neighbor she's like 98. Let's see if it says in here. 96. 96-year-old neighbor named Lillian who's lived at the refuge for 60 years. And then we get her backstory too. So when I started this, I was a little surprised because usually our main characters in Carol Goodman's novels are teachers or professors or artists, and you get like this huge backstory in terms of their place of work. There's like always a historical element. This has a huge historical element with Lillian's character, and then Joan starts to sort of research the time period that Lillian was living in the Magdalene Laundry. If you're not familiar with Magdalene Laundry, they were basically mostly in Ireland, but a few in the United States, and they were these like places for fallen women where you would go and work these laundries and be treated terribly. I don't know if there's ever been a case where a woman was like, I loved living at the Magdalene Laundry. I gave this book 4.5 stars. I really loved it. It's not my favorite Carol Goodman, but I do heartily recommend it. It has very creepy vibes. A lot of Carol Goodman's books, and this one included, you have a unreliable narrator, which I really appreciate. So in this one, Joan has been chloroformed, and her memory's all messed up. So she's not actually sure how much of what is happening to her is real or if it's part of her like damage to her brain from being chloroformed and hit on the head. If you're looking for a non-cozy mystery to curl up with, check out The Stranger Behind You by Carol Goodman. New spot, new blanket. Let's finish this wrap up. I also have tea and soup now in 2 mugs. The next book I read in November was Baird and Betrayed by Heather McCorkle. I had the ARC for it. It is a paranormal romance that takes place in Hemlock Hollow, a town in Montana completely populated by werewolves, which was cool. I liked that aspect of the book. I just realized I've got so many windows in here, so my glasses are glaring like crazy. Our heroine is Alexis, and I can't see. She was a cop when she was a human, and then she gets bitten against her will and becomes sort of like a werewolf cop, which was interesting. She is matched up with this man named Raoul, who is supposed to like guide her into becoming, like being immersed in werewolf life. She doesn't like him right off the bat because he has turned someone into a werewolf against their will. So they're kind of like set up to dislike each other. There's been like this string of people being bitten against their will and they don't know who's doing the bitings. And so Alexis and Raoul are investigating. There's also a lot of like politics in terms of the different packs. There's multiple packs of werewolves and like which pack you belong to and where you stand in the pack. I gave this 4.5 stars for the fantasy investigation plotline. I really liked it. I forgot to mention there's also like a ton about Norse mythology in here. Werewolves are considered children of Fenrir, which is like the wolf from Ragnarok. And that's like a huge part of the story is their immersion in Norse mythology. So I really liked the fantasy portion of this book a lot. It kept me super interested and I wanted to know what happened. I liked how the mystery of it all was resolved. I didn't like the romance portion as much. I thought it was fine, but I wasn't as invested in the romantic plotline. But I still gave it like 3.75 stars. Like it wasn't bad. Like I didn't feel like it was like poorly done or anything like that. I just liked the fantasy part a lot more. This was also the third book in a series, and sometimes I do that. Sometimes I'll just read a book in the middle of a series to see, especially if I'm like going to review it for an arc, to see whether or not it can actually be read as a standalone. And this one could. Like the first chapter, I was a little bit lost, just like in the setup of the town, because I didn't really understand the dynamic of it all yet. Something I really liked about this in terms of the third of the series is you couldn't really tell who the previous couples were. There were a few couples mentioned, but you couldn't really tell which ones the books have been about, which I liked. I don't love in series when they've got like a ton of callbacks to couples, like romance series in particular, when they have callbacks to couples that already got their HEA. Like, I don't care anymore about them. I'm like, let's move on. Even couples that like I adored, I don't know. Their story's over. Focus on this couple. Oh my God, that tastes so good. That's chicken and dumpling soup, and it's delicious. So the last book I actually completed in November, so I only completed 5 books in November, which is quite low for me, was The Family by Naomi Krupitsky, and this was my book of the month pick for November. I actually had a hard time picking which book I was going to read for November because nothing really like stood out, and there were a couple I felt like somewhat interested in but not super interested in, but I went with this one and I'm glad I did. This is a historical fiction and it takes place over decades. It starts, I want to say, like in the early 1900s. I'm going to let you know. 1928. And it ends in the 1950s, I want to say. No, maybe 40s. And it ends in 1948. So it takes place over 20 years. This tells the story of 2 girls, Antonia and Sophia, and they're best friends and neighbors, and they are both children of men that are involved in the family, which obviously is like the early mafia in the United States, in New York in particular, in Brooklyn they live. This is a very medium-paced book, which is good. I like reading medium-paced books, but it's very like slow and steady. Like when you're reading this book, you enjoy it. The writing is so good. This woman's an amazing writer. Her writing is beautiful. It's such a craft to read this. It feels like, oh my gosh, I need to work on my writing. Like she really can write so well. But when you read the chapters, when you finish a chapter, you don't really necessarily feel like, oh, I need to keep going. And in that way, it's a little bit like of a slower paced read. The story begins when the girls are, Antonia and Sophia are 6 years old, and Antonia's father disappears. And that sort of like sets off the rest of their lives in terms of what it means to be part of this family and what it's going to mean for them. I really liked seeing a mafia story told from the point of view of both children and then young women who at the end become young mothers. I'm not really a mafia person. Like I don't like The Godfather or Goodfellas or any of those movies. They just really don't do it for me. But reading it from the feminine, female point of view, whatever, it made it much more interesting for me. I also really liked how major events are covered in this. In particular, World War II and the Holocaust is handled in a really interesting way because it felt super realistic. Like, neither of the women are married to men who go fight in the war. They're married to men who stay home. And I liked reading a story about what it felt like to just, like, live in America during World War II. And there wasn't any, like, letter writing with a loved one. It was definitely a different take on World War II, which was interesting because I do feel like, and this is probably just because I've worked in books for so long, but there's so much historical fiction about World War II that I feel like it's kind of saturated, and this was different in the way it treated it. Also, the whole book wasn't about World War II, so that's part of it. I gave this book, I think, 4.5 stars, but in all honesty, I think it took me like 8 days to read it. It wasn't something that I was like rushing to read, and also the writing was so beautiful, I wasn't going to skim any portion of it. I was really going to like really, really pay attention to it. I'm sad because there was such a beautiful line in here that I can't find about the month of November. And I'm hoping that I can go through Goodreads and someone on their Kindle highlighted it because I read it when I was at my son's basketball practice. And so I didn't have like a pen or anything to copy it down so I could remember it for later. And that made me sad. So hopefully I'll find it. And maybe I'll let you know what it was if I can find it. So that's The Family by Naomi Krupitsky. I will definitely read another book by her. I'm pretty sure this is her debut. And I don't know if she has anything cooking. Yeah, it is her debut. But next time she has another book come out, I'll definitely read it. Okay, I also started but did not finish 2 books that I will finish, but I didn't finish them yet. The first is The Maid by Nita Prose. It's an arc. I started this right after I finished The Family, thinking that I'd want something a little bit more fast-paced. And it's a mystery that I'd be able to sort of fly through it. And it's kind of a slower paced mystery. So I read the first like 20% and then I put it down thinking I was going to come back to it and finish it later. And I will. I think the book comes out in January. So I have a couple months to get to it. And I probably, since it's a Kindle read, that's like the books I read when I can't sleep. So I'll probably read it slowly over this month or read it in January. And the last book that I started but did not finish yet is Beautiful Country by Julie Wang. I am on page 146. I actually got in bed last night at like 8 o'clock thinking I would try to finish it, but that's right about when I started feeling not so good, and so instead I watched 3 episodes of Call the Midwife before I went to bed and didn't finish this. But I'm definitely going to finish this probably in the next week. This I've talked about so many times because I had it on my October TBR and then on my November TBR, and I'm still not done with it. So I will wait to give it a full-on review in my December wrap-up. Plus, I am going to do a just book of the month 2021 wrap-up, and it will be in there as well. So here's something I learned about myself doing this month of reading that I had planned. If you watched my November TBR, I had planned to read a ton of Kindle books on my November TBR. I actually didn't have The Family on my TBR because I hadn't, Book of the Month hadn't released their picks yet when I filmed. And I knew I would read whatever I picked as long as I did pick something. But I put a ton of Kindle books. And here's the thing. I don't really like reading on my Kindle anymore. I've learned. So I read Ice Planet Barbarians on my Kindle. And then I took a break and I read 2 hard copy books. The Stranger Behind You and Witches Get Stitches. And then I read Baird and Betrayed. And then I read The Family. And then I went to read The Maid. And I was just really sick of reading on my Kindle. And it makes sense. So I wasn't like a Kindle person. Having worked in an independent bookstore when like Kindle came out, we thought it was going to like destroy book selling as we knew it, and it really hasn't. But I got a Kindle when I had my first baby. I didn't have it when he was born, and I was reading so many books on my phone in the middle of the night with like tiny print. It was taking forever. So I got a Kindle, and a Kindle is great when you're up in the middle of the night with feeding babies. And so I really depended on my Kindle for a long time. And during the beginning of the pandemic when I wasn't going to bookstores or the library. But now I find that like I just don't enjoy reading on a Kindle as much as I do reading a hard copy book. So from here on out, I think I'm only going to read maybe one Kindle book a month. I don't mind reading novellas on my Kindle. There's something about, this is going to sound weird, but like my Kindle tells me how many hours I have left in the book. And there is something about opening a book that's like, you have 9 hours left to read this book. And I'm like, 9 hours? Oh my God. But like a novella, it's like, you have 2.5 hours. And I'm like, oh, perfect. I'll read this in like 1 or 2 nights. So I'll probably still keep reading novellas on my Kindle. But from here on out, I am going to try to only read ARCs on my Kindle. Obviously, I have some purchased stuff that's on there that I'll get to eventually, but I'm going to try my hardest not to buy any more Kindle books and only do advanced reader's copies I get for free from NetGalley so I can review them. All right, I am starting to feel super not good, so I'm going to shut this down, finish my soup, drink my tea, and probably read a couple chapters of Beautiful Country and then maybe put on some more Call the Midwife. I hope you are in the middle of a good book, about to start a good book, or about to start writing a great book. Cheers. Here's to December.